Mrs. Sarah Wilson was knocking incessantly at the bedroom door, her heart sinking with the dread of an impending tragedy. Inside the room, it wasn't silent. A storm was brewing, ready to explode at any second. Chloe, an innocent and fragile girl of only 18, was huddled in a corner of the bed, clutching the hem of her heavy white racy bridal gown with trembling fingers. Her eyes were vast oceans of tears, desperate to spill over her lashes. Ethan, who had been staring her down for what felt like an eternity, let out a venomous, dark laugh. "You look so beautiful in that dress, Chloe. Did you really think this transition would be easy?" His voice was thick with suppressed anger and sheer contempt. Chloe gathered every ounce of her courage, and fighting against her own stutter, she screamed, I don't want to stay with you. You are a disgusting human being. You are a monster." Ethan, who had entered the room intending to simply hand her divorce papers and end it, froze at her words. His male ego was shattered by her defiance. "How do you speak about me like that?" He rushed forward and landed a powerful slap across her face. Chloe's head slammed against the wooden headboard, and a sharp, pained sob escaped her lips. At that moment, Mrs. Sarah pushed open the door, her face pale with terror. She stood before Ethan, trying to push him back. "Ethan, she's so young. She doesn't even understand the complexities of life yet. Don't claim you're right over her today. It would be a sin." But Ethan was possessed by a dark, vengeful frenzy. He grabbed his mother's arm and pushed her toward the door. "Get out, Mom. She needs to know her place today. She needs to see exactly what the man she calls disgusting is capable of doing to her." Mrs. Sarah left the room weeping, and Ethan slammed the door shut, turning the lock with a definitive click. Chloe's screams echoed from within, but soon faded into a haunting silence. Mrs. Sarah sat on the floor in the hallway, mourning the loss of innocence, until Ethan eventually emerged. His clothes were disheveled, and his face carried a look of savage, hollow satisfaction. He walked past Sarah as if there was nothing left behind him but ruins. When Sarah entered the room with trembling steps, the sight before her shattered her soul. There were bloodstains scattered across the pristine white floor, and Chloe lay motionless. Her expensive designer bridal gown was in tatters, and the white marble was stained red with the blood flowing from her innocent frame. The ground beneath Sarah's feet seemed to give way. She stood paralyzed, witnessing a horrific scene that felt more like a nightmare than reality. Chloe, who had been blooming like a delicate bud just a while ago, now lay scattered on the floor like a withered flower. Sarah rushed forward, supporting her with trembling hands, trying to lift her lifeless body. "Chloe, my child, open your eyes, Chloe." Her voice was lost in heavy sobs, but Chloe's eyes remained closed, and cold sweat glistened on her forehead. With great difficulty, Sarah moved her to the bed. The waves of pain were visible on Chloe's face. She was in agony, and faint whimpers escaped her lips that pierced Sarah's heart. Sarah quickly pulled a sheet from the closet to cover her broken form. Her own hands were stained with blood, but her only thought was for Chloe. Chloe groaned in pain, opened her eyes for a fleeting second, and then lost consciousness again. With shaking hands, Sarah dialed their family doctor, Dr. Miller. "Doctor, please, for God's sake, come quickly. Everything is ruined. Chloe is in a terrible condition." The desperation and fear in her voice were enough to convey the gravity of the situation. After hanging up, she sat by Chloe again. Holding her hand, she felt crushed between her maternal love for her son and the horror of his brutality, while the walls of the room stood as silent witnesses to the tragedy that had just occurred. After the examination, Dr. Miller gave Sarah some precautions in an extremely grave tone. He stated clearly that Chloe's condition was more psychological than physical. She had suffered a severe trauma and needed complete rest and constant monitoring, otherwise her life could be at risk. Sarah stood paralyzed, listening to the doctor, while the echoes of Ethan's cruelty still rang in her ears like a death knell. When Chloe finally regained consciousness, her eyes were bloodshot and her body was aching with intense pain. As soon as her gaze fell upon Sarah, there was no longing for motherly affection. Instead, a wave of intense hatred washed over her. In a voice filled with weakness and agony, she spoke with a stutter. "I begged you, Aunt Sarah. I told you your son isn't a human, he's a beast. I told you not to make me a part of his life. but your stubbornness and your family pride turned my life into a living hell. I will never forgive you, and I will never forgive that son of yours who stripped me of my soul." The pain in Chloe's voice tore through Sarah's heart, but she could do nothing but weep silently. That entire night passed in mourning and agony, and Ethan did not return to the house after that horrific night. Sarah stayed on her prayer mat, praying and pacing the lounge in a state of high anxiety, wondering what the future held for them all. When the morning sun rose, Ethan entered the house with his usual cold indifference. But when Sarah looked toward the upstairs bedroom, her heart pounded with dread. She rushed up to find a deathly silence. The room was empty. Chloe had left, leaving behind her broken body and the remnants of her shattered life. Her belongings were gone, and the innocent girl whom Sarah had sacrificed for her ego was nowhere to be found. Ethan stood there, seemingly more intoxicated by his own pride than concerned with finding her, while Sarah finally realized she had extinguished the light of a happy life forever. 7 long years passed, and Ethan's life during those years was nothing but a void of regret. He had moved heaven and earth to find Chloe, but she had vanished as if she had never existed. The same ego that was once his pride had now become a noose around his neck, and he lived every moment haunted by the echoes of that innocent girl's sobs. Today, he was scheduled to meet the country's most famous businesswoman and investor, known only as ZS, for a massive project. She was rumored to be as ruthless and principled as she was beautiful. Ethan sat restlessly in his office conference hall, waiting for her, when the sound of heavy footsteps and a familiar yet sharp perfume startled him. As the door opened, the file slipped from Ethan's hand, and his breath caught in his chest. Chloe stood before him. But this wasn't the 18-year-old stuttering, terrified girl. Instead, she was dressed in a sharp black business suit, wearing high heels, with a face radiating absolute confidence, a woman whose eyes held not a shred of respect for Ethan. She nonchalantly took off her glasses, leaned her hands on the table directly in front of Ethan, and spoke in a commanding voice that had no trace of a stutter. "Mr. Ethan Wilson, I heard you're in need of a lifeline, but remember, my terms will be just as harsh as that black night you forced upon me." Ethan stared at her, paralyzed. He couldn't believe that the girl he had crushed and discarded was now standing before him as the master of his fate. The ice in Chloe's eyes froze Ethan to the core, and he realized that the revenge had only just begun. As soon as the meeting ended and silence fell over the room, Ethan controlled his trembling voice and said, "Ms. Chloe, I need to speak with you in private." Chloe cast a deep, cold look at him and, without any fear or hesitation, signaled for him to follow her with a slight nod. She walked with total confidence into her luxurious office, where every award and piece of furniture bore witness to her success and power. As soon as Ethan entered, his restraint snapped. He suddenly grabbed Chloe's arm, pulling her toward him, and slammed the door shut, locking it. His eyes were filled with years of longing, regret, and a strange madness. But Chloe didn't even blink. Before Ethan could say a word, Chloe wrenched her arm from his grip with all her might and pushed him back with such hatred and rage that Ethan stumbled against the desk. "Don't you dare repeat your disgusting actions in front of me, Ethan. This isn't a locked room from 7 years ago, and I am not that helpless girl you can trample under your feet. Now, if you even try to touch me, remember that I will make you crawl on the same floor where you once spilled my blood." The stony hardness in Chloe's voice turned Ethan's existence into ice, and for the first time, he realized that the spark he had tried to extinguish had now become a flame that would turn him to ash. Shadows of madness and obsession flickered in Ethan's eyes as he lunged at Chloe again, seizing both her arms in an iron grip. His fingers dug into Chloe's delicate arms with such intensity that she felt her bones might snap. Shaking her, Ethan roared, "Where did you go? Why did you leave me? Tell me!" 7 years of suppressed longing and anger exploded in his voice. Chloe pushed against his chest with all her strength, trying to shove him away, but Ethan stood like a stone wall. He leaned close to her face and whispered, "You escaped my hands once, Chloe. I won't let you go again, even if I have to chain you down to keep you here." A fire of hatred, rather than fear, ignited in Chloe's eyes, and she screamed at the top of her lungs, "I hate you, Ethan. I hated you then, and even today. Every shadow of your existence makes me sick. Don't you dare lay a finger on me." She exerted every ounce of her strength to free herself, but Ethan seemed to have lost his senses. He suddenly pinned Chloe against the wall and began a barrage of strikes. He was at a point of brutality and madness where he couldn't see anything else. He had become a beast once again to fulfill a years-old, dark desire, while Chloe struggled in his clutches. Ethan tightened his grip further, pulling her closer as if he wanted to throw her into the furnace of his ego and destroy both himself and her forever. The atmosphere in the room was once again filled with the same suffocating horror that had defined that dark night 7 years ago. Sensing Ethan's madness, Chloe began to defend herself with everything she had. She struggled with all her might to escape his grasp and dug her sharp nails into his strong arm. Chloe's nails left deep marks on the back of Ethan's hands, and red lines of blood emerged, but the monster seemed to feel no pain. She put all her strength into pushing him back, and with every attempt to distance him, she struck at his face and neck with her nails. "Let me go, Ethan. Get away from—" Her voice was stifled in her throat, but she was not one to give up. Ethan's obsession was at its peak. He grew even more incensed by Chloe's resistance and the marks she left on him, and his grip on her body tightened like a vice. Chloe was gasping for air, trembling at the thought of being near this beast, but she continued her struggle. In her eyes, instead of tears, there was now a fire of vengeance sufficient to turn Ethan's madness into ash. She kept sinking her nails into his flesh, trying to break free from the cage Ethan had begun to build around her again after all these years. Amidst Chloe's resistance and Ethan's savage obsession, when the atmosphere had become unbearably heavy, a loud, authoritative knock on the office door suddenly snapped Ethan back to his senses. He was hovering over Chloe like a thirsty predator, but that sound forced him to step back. Gasping for air, Ethan released Chloe and leaned against the desk to steady himself, while Chloe stood pressed against the wall. Her breath was ragged, and she clutched her chest as if the air in her lungs had vanished. Her eyes were red, and her face was flushed with rage and agony. The marks of Ethan's hands were visible on her white arms, bearing witness to the horror that had just unfolded in that locked room. She stood frozen, looking at Ethan as if she would kill him with his own scenes, while Ethan tried unsuccessfully to normalize himself, his hair disheveled and his hands wounded. The knock on the door came again, and a voice from outside deepened the tense silence between them. Chloe took a long, deep breath, straightened her hair and clothes, and tried to control her trembling voice so the person outside wouldn't know about the violent clash that had just occurred. Blood was seeping from the nail marks on Ethan's hands. Chloe, with an incredible stability and icy coldness in her voice, signaled toward the guards and spoke loudly. "Mr. Athanas, forgetting his boundaries, escort him out of my office immediately and ensure that this man is never seen even in the shadow of this building again." A wave of humiliation and anger washed over Ethan's face. He struggled to say something, but Chloe gave him no chance and said even more heartlessly, "All our deals are terminated immediately. I don't want to do business with a mental patient who doesn't know how to respect a woman." Ethan was burning from within after being humiliated in front of everyone, but with the guards stepping forward, he was forced to leave with heavy, defeated steps. As he walked through the hall, he could hear the whispers of the employees, which ground his male ego into the dust. As soon as he sat in his car, he slammed his hand against the steering wheel, a savage glint appearing in his eyes. This humiliation had increased his obsession to reclaim Chloe and break her 1,000 times over. He dialed someone on his phone and growled, "I want an update on every second of Chloe Shaw's life. Where she goes, who she meets. I want to know everything. Now, I won't bring her to me with love, but through a weakness that will make her fall at my feet herself." When Ethan entered the bedroom of his luxurious penthouse, the silence of the walls seemed to haunt him. The humiliation at the office and seeing so much hatred for him in Chloe's eyes had shattered his being. In a state of rage and restlessness, he ripped his tie from his neck, threw it on the floor, and lit a cigarette with trembling hands. All night long, he stood by the window in the dark room, smoking one cigarette after another, and with every puff, Chloe's new, bold, and beautiful persona flickered before his eyes. His heart was aching to take the car and go to Chloe right then. He wanted to take her in his strong arms, hold her close to his chest, and sob loudly, telling her how every moment of these 7 years was spent in longing and agony. He wanted to scream that he loved her obsessively and that her departure had buried him alive. But as soon as he thought of taking a step forward, his old, rigid ego stood like a wall before him, the same ego that had always kept him on the brink of destruction. He was fighting himself. On one side was the desire to have Chloe, and on the other was the bitter reality of what he had done to her. He dug his fingers into his hair and sat on the floor. He felt his ego losing to his longing and love, yet he was still stubborn in his belief that Chloe must bow before him. As the night wore on and the room filled with smoke, the fire in Ethan's heart grew even fiercer. Ethan's restlessness reached the point of madness when Head demanded a full report on every moment of Chloe's life from his private investigator. He was certain that in these 7 years, Chloe must have hidden some weakness that would bring her back to his feet. When he received the sensational revelation about Chloe's life the next morning, the coffee mug slipped from Ethan's hand and shattered on the floor. He discovered that the intimacy of his horrific night 7 years ago had made Chloe a mother, and she had given birth to a son away from Ethan, a son who was now 7 years old. Hearing about his own blood and his own legacy, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, and he stood paralyzed for a moment. The very child he had sacrificed in the furnace of his ego had emerged today as his greatest asset. Ethan's longing took a new turn. His heart yearned to fly to his son and hold him close. The thought kept circling in his mind that Chloe had hidden his son from him all these years. With a mix of anger and longing, he immediately took the car and went straight to the elementary school where his son was a student. Standing at the school gate, he waited for the children to come out. His eyes searched every face for a reflection of himself, and as a small child, the spitting image of Ethan, emerged from the building, Ethan's breath stopped. He was about to step forward when he remembered his ego and Chloe's hatred, but a father's love was far heavier today. He slowly approached his son, whom Chloe had perhaps named something else to keep him out of Ethan's reach, but to Ethan, he was simply his own blood. As soon as that innocent child stepped out of the school's outer gate, Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Before him was the reflection of his own existence, the same features, the same eyes that were his own identity. Ethan was still standing at a distance, watching him with fixed eyes, when suddenly that little angel's gaze fell on Ethan, and a spark appeared on his innocent face as if he had seen a dream he'd been missing for years. The child ran toward Ethan on his small legs and shouting, "Daddy! Daddy!" with all his might, clung tightly to Ethan's legs. The ground slipped from under Ethan's feet, and the years of restraint flowed out as tears. He desperately leaned down, lifted his son firmly into his arms, and squeezed him to his chest as if he would never let him go again. Hearing the word "daddy" from the mouth of this innocent child, all of Ethan's ego, anger, and brutality, which he had nurtured for 7 years, turned to dust. He kissed his son's forehead over and over, and a pang of guilt shot through his heart, wishing he could erase those 7 years when he had unleashed that horror on Chloe. He realized that Chloe had given him such a severe punishment by depriving him even of the scent of his son and his own blood. The child wrapped his small arms around Ethan's neck, looking at him with such love as if he had been waiting for his father forever. Ethan, oblivious to the world, was lost in the scent of his son, unaware that Chloe was standing a short distance away, watching it all, and the trembling tears in her eyes were about to become a burning ember. As Chloe rushed forward desperately and tried to snatch the child from Ethan's arms, the innocent boy wrapped his small arms even tighter around Ethan's neck, clinging fiercely to his father's chest. His eyes filled with tears as he looked at his mother and spoke in a voice choked with emotion. "Mommy, you're mean. You told me Daddy went to be with God. You lied to me." The ground slipped from under Chloe's feet, and she stood paralyzed, shattered by the words coming from her own son's mouth. The child clutched Ethan's shirt in his fists, sobbing, "Daddy, I don't want to go anywhere. I want to go with Daddy. I'm never leaving him." When Ethan heard Chloe's lie from his son's lips, he felt anger toward Chloe for making his son an orphan while he was still alive. Yet he also felt a strange sense of victory because his own blood was testifying for him. Ethan looked Chloe in the eyes with a challenging gaze and, pulling the child further into his embrace, stroked his head. Chloe's maternal love and her pride were losing today in front of her own heart's peace. She stood helplessly, watching the man she had run from for 7 years now providing sanctuary to her son in his arms. Ethan whispered something into the child's ear and then, looking at Chloe, spoke in a cold tone. "See, Chloe? Blood finds its own way. You lied to keep him from me, but fate brought him to my chest. Now this child isn't going anywhere, and I won't let you take him from me." Chloe's heart began to sink because she realized that Ethan would now use the child as a pawn to pull her into a quicksand from which escape would be impossible. Chloe's eyes flickered with helplessness and horror as she saw her own child clinging to the chest of the man she had been hiding from for 7 years. She rushed forward and screamed in a trembling voice, "Leo, come to me and leave that man. He is no one to you." But the child wrapped his small arms even tighter around Ethan's neck and cried, "No, Mommy. You lied to me that Daddy went to be with God. I found my daddy. Now I won't go anywhere. I want to stay with Daddy." Ethan gave Chloe a triumphant and poisonous smile. His ego had finally found peace after 7 years because his own blood was testifying for him. Pulling the child deeper into his embrace, Ethan moved closer to Chloe and whispered in a cold tone, "You see, Chloe? You used a lie to keep him away from, but fate brought him to my chest. Now if you try to take him from me, I will go to court and prove with a DNA test that he is my heir. Then you will never even see his face again." Chloe's heart began to sink, and the ground beneath her feet vanished. She knew that Ethan was as powerful as he was ruthless. She trembled at the thought of losing her son. Ethan took advantage of her silence and fear to play his final move. "If you want your son to stay with you, you have to come back to my mansion with me today. You will live there not as my wife, but as Leo's mother. The choice is yours. Either come with me or forget your son forever." Chloe looked at the weeping Leo, who was clinging to Ethan, and then at Ethan's stone-like face. She realized she was being pulled back into the same cage she had barely escaped, but her motherhood won, and she accepted Ethan's condition in a broken voice. She walked toward Ethan's car with heavy steps, but in Ethan's heart, a new wave of vengeance and obsession arose, determined to make Chloe pay for every sin and every lie. As soon as she stepped across the threshold of the mansion, a shiver ran through Chloe's entire being. The same walls and the same suffocating atmosphere began to reopen 7-year-old wounds. Ethan entered triumphantly, holding Leo in his arms, but Chloe's eyes were searching the hall for someone. Mrs. Sarah's name was on the tip of her tongue, hoping she would be the same maternal shadow to save her from this beast. But the mysterious silence in the house and the black-framed portrait of Mrs. Sarah on the wall made Chloe's heart sink. Ethan followed Chloe's gaze and spoke with a cold sigh. "Are you looking for her, Chloe? She passed away shortly after you left. The grief of your departure and the regret of my actions consumed her from within. She kept calling your name until her final moment, but you had disappeared to build your new world." The news of Mrs. Sarah's passing took the ground from beneath Chloe's feet, and she collapsed onto the floor in helplessness. She realized that there was no sympathizer left for her in this mansion, and she was now completely at Ethan's mercy. Ethan lowered Leo and, winding Chloe's hair around his fingers, lifted her up and whispered in her ear, "Now, there is no motherly love from Sarah in this house, nor anyone's interference. Now it's just me, my son, and you. And remember, no wall will protect you from my anger now." Chloe looked with tearful eyes at her son, who was innocently looking at his grandmother's portrait. She realized that with Sarah gone, Ethan's madness was no longer restrained, and she would have to die a new death every moment in this cage. Chloe sat huddled in a corner of the bed in the same room where the darkest night of her life had occurred 7 years ago. Her eyes were fixed, and she looked at the walls as if they were coming to swallow her. Leo was now with Ethan in another room, whom Ethan had put to sleep with great affection and lullabies because that child had now become the greatest obsession of Ethan's life. In the late hours of the night, when a deathly silence hung over the house, the sound of Ethan's footsteps sent a tremor through Chloe's being. As soon as Ethan entered the room, Chloe stood up with a mix of fear and hatred, but before she could say anything, Ethan grabbed her arm with a savage jerk and pulled her into his strong embrace. Chloe struggled and put all her strength into pushing him away, but Ethan's grip tightened like a vice. In his eyes, there was no longer the old brutality, but a strange thirst and madness. He leaned close to Chloe's face and whispered in a heavy voice, "Before, I only had hatred for you, Chloe. My goal was to break your pride, but the longing of these 7 years has shown me that I am incomplete without you. I have fallen in love with you, Chloe. I can't live without you anymore." Chloe's heart filled with even more hatred at hearing this, and she began to punch Ethan's broad chest with both hands. She exerted all her strength to distance him, and with every punch, tears of rage flowed from her eyes. "Such love! Ethan, monsters like you don't love. You only know how to destroy. I am disgusted by your very existence. Get away from me." The contempt in Chloe's voice pierced Ethan's heart, but instead of letting her go, he pulled her even tighter into his embrace, as if he wanted to convince her that he would burn her in the hell of his love. Days passed, and a strange cold war settled over the atmosphere of the house. Chloe gathered her broken spirit and, to get her professional life back on track, she would drop Leo off at school every morning and head to her office, while Ethan's obsession had taken a new form. He revolved around Leo all day, picked him up from school, and fulfilled his every small wish in the blink of an eye. Leo had become so accustomed to his father's immense attention and love that he wasn't ready to spend a moment without Ethan. Ethan had given Chloe so much agony, and now he wanted to perhaps atone for his sins by loving Leo with that same intensity. But the fire of hatred in Chloe's heart showed no signs of dying out. She avoided Ethan's every touch and every word, seeing him as nothing but a monster. In the shadow of their silent hatred and Leo's innocent love, life was passing by when suddenly, one evening, tragedy struck the house. Leo, who was always cheerful, suddenly began to complain of a high fever and severe body aches. Ethan and Chloe, who couldn't stand the sight of each other, became one at the sight of their child's condition and rushed him to the city's largest hospital. When the doctors there performed various tests on Leo and moved him to the ICU, the ground beneath Ethan and Chloe's feet vanished. After hours of waiting, when Dr. Miller emerged with a file in his hand, the gravity on his face stopped their hearts. The doctor gathered his strength with great difficulty and explained that the number of white cells in Leo's blood samples had increased abnormally, and the initial symptoms pointed to a critical case of leukemia. Hearing this, a piercing scream escaped Chloe's lips, and she collapsed unconscious on the floor, while Ethan, who considered himself as strong as a mountain, sank down against the wall. His pride, his wealth, and his power were helpless today before the innocent son he had made the purpose of his new life. He was now in a struggle between life and death, and according to the doctors, only a miracle or a long and painful treatment could save him now. The walls of the hospital, which once echoed with laughter, were now drowned in a deathly silence and the terrifying shadow of cancer. The white hospital walls and the smell of disinfectants in the air were pounding against Chloe's senses. She and Ethan sat paralyzed outside the doctor's office while Leo's fate was being decided inside. When the doctor called them in, Chloe's heart sank at the gravity of his expression, and Ethan's strong hands trembled. Pointing toward the reports on the desk, the doctor spoke in an extremely somber tone. "Mr. Ethan and Ms. Chloe, Leo has leukemia, and unfortunately it is spreading very rapidly. His own bone marrow has stopped producing healthy blood, and now even chemotherapy won't be able to sustain him for long." A muffled scream escaped Chloe's throat, and she collapsed into a chair, while Ethan looked at the doctor with bloodshot eyes as if refusing to accept the reality. The doctor continued, explaining that the only way to save Leo was a bone marrow transplant, but the problem was that neither of their cells were a perfect match. He needed a 100% matching donor, which could only be a biological sibling. Chloe asked, desperately, "But doctor, he doesn't have any siblings. Is there no other way?" The doctor took a deep breath and looked them both in the eye, saying something that turned the air in the room to ice. "Medically, there is one way, which we call a savior sibling. If you both were to conceive another child, the stem cells obtained from the umbilical cord at the time of birth could prove to be a new life for Leo. We would need 9 months, and during that time, we will do our best to keep Leo alive through chemotherapy. It is a difficult path, but it is the last hope to save Leo's life. Chloe felt as if someone had thrown her into boiling lava. The man whose shadow she hated, whose cruelty had kept her wandering for 7 years, today, being near him, was the price for her son's life. She looked wildly at Ethan, who was also stunned by the revelation. Ethan's pride and ego were ground to dust at Hissen's deathbed. He looked at Chloe with trembling hands, whose eyes were filled with hatred on one side and the intense agony of motherhood on the other. The doctor's words were pounding in her ears, that Leo had very little time and every passing day was bringing him closer to death. Chloe wanted to scream until she brought the heavens down. What a cruel game fate was playing with her. On one side, she saw the withered face of her innocent son, and on the other, the hell Ethan had pushed her into years ago. The silence in the room was so heavy it was impossible to breathe. Ethan stood up from the chair, folded his hands before Chloe, and spoke in a choked voice. "Chloe, give me any punishment for my every sin. Kill me, but save Leo. He is my blood too, Chloe." Chloe cast a look of hatred at his face full of regret and then looked at Leo's lifeless form through the ICU window. She closed her eyes as if preparing her soul for the decision whose price she had to pay by once again sacrificing her self-respect. She knew these 9 months would be the most difficult of her life, but for her son, she was ready to descend into the pit of death. When Ethan entered the room, there was a silence that was heavier than words. Chloe sat paralyzed on a corner of the bed, her face pale and her eyes swollen, as if years of trauma had broken over her in a single day. The man she hated, whose touch disgusted her, was now the only hope for her son's life. There was no longer the old brutality in Ethan's steps, but a regret that was consuming him from within. He quietly approached Chloe and tried to take her trembling hands in his, but Chloe pulled away with a jerk. The fire of contempt was still in her eyes, but the pain of motherhood was much deeper. "Don't touch me, Ethan. I am only here for Leo, not for you." Chloe's voice was as cold as ice. Ethan replied in a choked voice, "I know, Chloe. I have fallen in your eyes, but to save Leo, we have to go through this agony." That night, in the dim light of the room, when they came close to each other, this intimacy was not one of love, but of a silent compromise and intense pain. Chloe closed her eyes tightly, as if she wanted to erase this moment from her memory. The tears flowing down her cheeks were a testament to the wounds of her soul. Ethan held her in his embrace, but there was a strange longing in his heart. He wanted to give her love, to convince her of his affection, but Chloe's body was as cold and lifeless as a stone. Every passing night became a new test for them. Remembering Leo's failing health and his withered face, Chloe went through this agony every night so that a new life could be born within her, one that would pull her first child from the jaws of death. These intimacies, instead of reducing the distance between them, deepened the hatred for Ethan in Chloe's heart, while Ethan spent every night in the hope that perhaps in return for his sacrifice, he would gain Leo's life and Chloe's forgiveness. As the journey for Chloe's second hope began, a strange change settled over the atmosphere of the house. Ethan, who was once a beastly man intoxicated by his own ego, now revolved around Chloe like a shadow. When Chloe's health would deteriorate due to the pregnancy, when she felt nauseous or collapsed on the bed from weakness, Ethan would sit by her bedside like a madman. He would spend entire nights awake, sometimes massaging Chloe's feet or placing cold compresses on her forehead. In his eyes, there was no longer the old brutality, but a longing and responsibility that made it hard to believe he was the same Ethan. He would go to the kitchen himself to make Chloe's favorite meals and try to feed her with his own hands. Chloe would rebuff him with hatred, striking his hand to push him away, but Ethan endured it all without a word. His silent love and immense care had created a strange turmoil within Chloe. She was broken inside. The grief of Leo's illness was consuming her, but Ethan's changed persona forced her to think, could a human truly change this much? Ethan had left his lust and pride somewhere far behind during these 9 months. Now his only purpose was Leo's life and Chloe's comfort. Finally, the moment arrived when the long and difficult 9-month journey ended. Ethan paced outside the delivery room like a living corpse, prayers for Leo's life and Chloe's safety on his lips. When the nurse came out to give him the good news that God had blessed him with another son, Ethan's restraint broke, and he fell to his knees in gratitude. When he took the newborn into his arms, he let out a cry. The baby was a carbon copy of Leo. The same features, the same innocent eyes, as if Leo's childhood had returned. The doctor immediately obtained stem cells from the newborn baby's umbilical cord to begin Leo's transplant. Chloe lay on the bed, looking at Ethan with eyes full of exhaustion as he sobbed, holding his youngest son to his chest. The fatigue of those 9 months, Ethan's immense love, and now the arrival of this little angel had knocked on the closed doors of Chloe's heart. She felt that Ethan had erased himself over these 9 months to create a new person, yet a corner of her heart was still sore with those old wounds that perhaps could never heal. Time passed like a healing balm, and the miracle finally occurred. Leo's bone marrow transplant was completely successful, and within a few months, the colour of life returned to his face. After defeating a deadly disease like cancer, he was now as cheerful as before, but the true centre of this whole story was that little prince, whom they named Noah. Noah was so beautiful that anyone who saw him would be amazed. He was such a beautiful blend of Chloe's grace and Ethan's elegance that it seemed nature had sculpted him with great care. When his large, bright eyes would sparkle at the sight of Ethan, Ethan's heart would melt. Leo was so happy with his little brother that he wouldn't leave him for a moment. The walls of the mansion, once the dwelling of agonizing silence, now echoed with the laughter of 2 children. But behind all this, a silent yet profound change was taking place between Chloe and Ethan. The hatred that had guarded Chloe's heart for years proved to be a wall of sand in the face of Ethan's 9 months of immense effort, his service, and his regret. Chloe saw that Ethan was no longer the man who had once caused her pain. He was now a father ready to give his life for his children and a husband who would fight the whole world for his wife's single smile. Chloe's heart, which had once turned to stone, began to melt under the heat of Ethan's love. When she saw Ethan sleeping between both children at night, tears of gratitude would fill her eyes. The emotion now flourishing between them was not just love, but the height of passion where one loses themselves in the existence of the other. Ethan didn't just want Chloe anymore, he worshipped her. For him, a single tear from Chloe was equivalent to the end of the world. On the other hand, Chloe, who once ran from his shadow, could no longer even sleep without resting her head on Ethan's chest. Their hatred had tried very hard to keep them apart, but the love born from the womb of that hatred was so intense that it washed away all the wounds of the past. They both began to love each other with such intensity that no third thought could come between them. They had become a complete and beautiful family where sorrow was replaced by nothing but immense happiness and eternal love. The sun was setting in the backyard of the mansion. Leo and Noah were playing on the grass, while Ethan held Chloe's hand and pulled her close to him. They both looked at their children and smiled, knowing that their love had turned the direction of every storm.